When I was about 13 years old, I drove a car for the first time, and I was by myself, and it was kind of dangerous. My brother had just got his license, and my dad had tossed me the keys to my grandfather's old Mercedes. And it was a 1989 Mercedes 300E, a W124, and great car, very cool, old, classic, last of the... Never mind, we're not here to talk about Mercedes, but he tossed me the keys, and the idea was I would then walk with my brother to the car, and we would go run an errand together. But I thought it was really funny to just grab the keys and go outside, start the car, and start driving it down the road. I wasn't putting a lot of thought into it, and about half a block down the road, my brother's chasing after me, saying, "Oh, you got to be kidding me. You got to come back. You're in so much trouble." And so I successfully did a 3-point turn, and I came back, and I parked the car. And I was in a whole heap of trouble, but that car really meant a lot to me. And years later, I actually was given that car when my dad was essentially clearing out the garage, this old Mercedes that wasn't really worth anything. He said, "Hey, if you want it, it's yours." And I started fixing it up little by little. Unfortunately, it's gone now, and some tragedy that I'll tell some other day. But while I was working on that car, I was thinking, this is a cool old German automobile. I got to listen to some old like techno or something while I'm fixing this and really get into the spirit. And I thought, this is as good a time as ever to get into Kraftwerk. So I put on Autobahn, and I had never really listened to them before, and all of a sudden it became the background to me wrenching on this old Mercedes, and I completely fell in love with the band, and it kind of took over the next year of my life. I was entirely obsessed with them. So this week we're going to talk a little bit about Kraftwerk. This week's episode, the name of the episode is Lean Into It. Welcome to another week on Earth Tones. I'm Jake Pardee, your host, and we are talking about Kraftwerk, and we're talking about leaning into it. But first, here is a sound from Earth. That was the rainy day that we're having today at the studio, and a jet engine going by. And there's actually one going by right now that I can hear. I never knew how often jet engines were going by, how these planes are going by, until I recorded this voice memo, and now I'm realizing they're going by like every couple of minutes. I had no idea. I've been tuning it out for years. But there are jet engines going by all the time, man, I tell you. Okay, we're going to talk about Kraftwerk, but first, a bit of old news. Here's another interesting thing. So the way I'm doing these old news segments is I'm just sticking my hand in the rack of old guitar magazines and pulling them out. The very first episode 1, I deliberately chose a Jeff Beck and Stevie Ray Vaughan article from an old guitar player magazine. The next week, I reach in and I happen to grab one that was Jeff Beck and Billy Gibbons on the cover. This week, I put my hand in, I grab it out, and I say, "Oh, okay, it's Steve Vai, no Jeff Beck." And then I look, there's a Jeff Beck transcription, because we ended as lovers is part of this magazine. So I'm telling you, maybe I'll just come up with a Jeff Beck dedicated segment. So this week, for a bit of old news, Steve Vai joins Whitesnake. Now, this issue is actually from March 2020, and it's interesting because nobody knew that March 2020 was going to be the beginning of that which we do not speak about. So, this is a great little snippet I've got for you, a piece of old news. The question is put to Steve Vai: where were you at as a player when you got the Whitesnake call? So we joined Whitesnake for the recording of the album Slip of the Tongue, which is really great. I was listening to it since reading this article. I'm not a huge 80s rock guy all the time, but sometimes when you're in the spirit, it's pretty great. So, and that record, Slip of the Tongue, has a lot of awesome guitar work that Steve Vai did. So he was asked, where were you as a player when you got the Whitesnake call? Now, he had toured with Frank Zappa and David Lee Roth, and now he was about to pursue a solo career, and he gets the Whitesnake call. The funny thing is also that if you've ever seen that movie Crossroads, the end guitar duel, where it's Steve Vai versus the Karate Kid, he plays the devil and does this whole guitar solo. That scene is actually how he got the gig, and they talk about this, which is kind of amazing. But when he's talking about how did you feel about your playing at the time, he says this amazing thing here. He goes, there was a part of me back then that always went, why are all these people reacting this way to the way I play? It's not that great, because I always felt like there was another level. You don't know that you can't see the forest for the trees. So it's interesting. Steve Vai has been a huge influence for me, not just as a guitar player, but as like a music philosophy type of person, because he's always had a really grounded and well thought out approach to finding your own voice and encouraging others to do the same. So I love Steve Vai. I love that even him in the 1980s, at the peak of his rock stardom days, even was experiencing a certain amount of self-doubt, and that now he seems to understand it in good context. So that's a bit of old news. Steve Vai joins Whitesnake, and of course he goes on to have his solo career, puts out Passion and Warfare, and everything changes for the better in my world. I love Steve Vai and all his solo work. Very cool, very inspiring. So this week we're talking about leaning into it. And actually, Steve Vai is a great guy to look at for leaning into it. He's also a good guy to think about for the rock persona conversation, because he certainly has a bit of a down-to-earth nature to him, and then when he cranks it up on stage, he becomes, in some ways, the other guy. So we're talking about Kraftwerk. Kraftwerk, and this is their record, The Man Machine. So the idea of leaning into it and embracing who you are, or what the world might be expecting of you, is the subject of the day. So I had a chance to see Kraftwerk this year. They played at the Wang Theater in Boston, and I went with Scarlett, and we had an amazing time. They put on the show that any Kraftwerk fan would more or less expect, because they've been doing a variation of this show for a long time now. It started, I think, the 3D screen, evolved from the 3D project, the catalog, and has continued to be in various iterations of that for a long time. The reason why Kraftwerk to me really spoke to me was that I went into it thinking that they were a mechanical, electronic, historically significant, but very pattern-based techno type of music. That's what I went into it thinking that they were. And so I put on the music when I was fixing the old Mercedes, and all of a sudden I realized, listening to them, that they were groovy and they were full of a lot of soul and heart. And the more I learned about them, the more I realized that this is kind of their whole deal, that they put on an act to some degree of being robots. It's hard to determine whether or not they see it as an act or if they truly believe they're robots, but there's a whole other episode about Daft Punk and how that whole robot lineage works. But anyways, the fact that Kraftwerk was playing up this character of being robots is what I want to talk about. So before they became Kraftwerk as the Robots, they made these albums where they were technically still Kraftwerk. First, they were the organization, and that's like the first Kraftwerk record, but it's called Tone Float. If you want the entire Kraftwerk and German discography, by the way, send me a message. I probably shouldn't say this because Kraftwerk might find out. Those records before Autobahn are technically not Kraftwerk canon anymore. Kraftwerk considers the beginning of the real Kraftwerk to be with Audubon, and that's because of having created this persona and this sound that was so revolutionary. Before the Audubon record, they put out the organization record, Tone Float, and then Kraftwerk 1 and 2, and this album called Ralph und Florian. Those records are much more like a krautrock band like Neu, and they're very organic. And Florian is playing flute, and Ralph is playing different types of keyboards, and there's a lot of great grooves, and they do a lot of the motoric jams, which I'm a big fan of. And they have like a rock band sensibility, even if they're very experimental. They start with Audubon to find the sound of creating electronic music and ultimately become the man-machine version of Kraftwerk, the robots. They take on a lot of these industrial themes, and they lean into where they're from, Dusseldorf in Germany. I think what's great about Kraftwerk that I learned over time was the fact that they were very much meticulous when it comes to curating their image, their sound, and to be playing with expectations. So I think that based on where they were in history, they knew that they were going to be seen as German, with all the weight that might have come with in a post-war world, even though World War II was 30 years before, it was still fresh in everyone's memory. It was obviously a massive impact on the world and still is being felt today. And there was a certain aspect of the German identity that they were going to have to contend with as they became musicians on the international stage. I think what they were doing was leaning into a stereotype. It's like they were saying, okay, you think that we're mechanical. You think that we are, very precision oriented, very structured. We're distinctly German and obsessed with order. And the early records were much more rebellious before the Audubon record, much more of like a rock band. And I think that they found with Audubon and ultimately their robot identity a way of playing into these stereotypes and to play with pop culture and to let people kind of run with their imaginations and to have to deal with those expectations that are put upon them. So they also reference David Bowie a bit in their music. I think that they had a bit of a kindred spirit relationship with David Bowie for that reason too, because David Bowie leaned into things that he was saying, okay, I'm this androgynous rock and roll guy. Nobody quite understands my sexuality. I'm just going to lean into it. I'm going to play up everything. I'm going to wear makeup. I'm going to be the crazy outer space rock and roll guy. Even if he could have just been an awesome frontman who is a little more traditional, he played with people's expectations and he leaned into what people thought that he might have been. And when artists do this, it's really interesting because you have to then confront their music and their art where they're meeting the general public and then make your own opinions. So Kraftwerk, when you actually listen to them, and I'd really love to be able to find out what people thought about them when they came out. When you listen to them, you might go into it thinking, okay, these guys are robots. This is going to be electronic music. It's going to be repetitive and it's not going to be very human. And then you find out it's actually very groovy. It's very heartfelt. And there's love songs, like Neon Lights. These are great songs. Computer Love on Computer World is like one of my favorite songs ever. It's an amazing love song, essentially, within the structure of talking about computers. So I think that there's something to be said about finding out what the world kind of expects of you and holding up a mirror to that and saying, okay, I can see where you're going with that. I can even be some of that for you, but I know what I have to offer myself, and I'm going to bring that. So Kraftwerk, they're an excellent group to check out. I think there might be a lot of more artists if we go down this path of artists that lean into what the public perception of them might be, and then they play with your expectations. So I love Kraftwerk. I love that they didn't try to be something that they weren't. They knew that they were going to innovate within electronic music. I think it would have been cool if Florian kept playing flute, but I respect the fact that he put it down and said, we've got our synthesizers, we've got our programming, we know where we want to go. We're going to keep innovating within this new style of music that they were creating. Of course, they're one of the most influential groups of all time. They're said to be like the Beatles of electronic music. I love Kraftwerk. I love that they played with these expectations. I think that it's amazing that they said, yeah, we're German. Yeah, we're robots. Look, red, black, white, strong imagery. Isn't this scary, everyone around the world? And then you see actually Florian's, he's smiling. He's wearing red lipstick. He's doing okay. Everybody's okay. These are humans. They don't want you to know that. They want you to think that they're robots. And then when you listen to them, they are very clearly humans. And they're beautiful humans. I'm a big fan of Kraftwerk. So, to discuss the musical side of this, there is something great about krautrock and its repetitive nature. If I were to demonstrate a bit of that, if you were to try to get some of that organic, early, pre-Kraftwerk, like Neu. If you take anything and you ride it out. You can do that for about 20 minutes, get some flutes going, let it evolve, let it percolate, let it boil over. That's a bit of that early thing. To check that out, check out Neu. Like I said, if you can find those early Kraftwerk albums, those are solid. But the krautrock genre in general, super solid. A lot of great experimental music. So, if the world tells you what they think you are, instead of trying to run away from it, maybe you could lean into it and you could say, hey, all right, that's what we got. That's what you think I am. Let's see what else I can do too. So, of course, what's on the turntable this week is The Man Machine by Kraftwerk. Amazing album. You can't find out a lot of information about production of how they actually made these things at the Kling Klang studio. So this, it actually says who was mixed by. Mixed by Joshko Rudis and Leonard Jackson. And then I looked up, Rudis was a studio too. And there's a nightclub there in Dusseldorf that's called Rudis. I wonder if it's the same place. Maybe I can go check it out someday. So that is nearly it for this week, except to talk about the last segment, something that helped me this week. Something that helped me this week was thinking about how I don't have to be understanding of how it all works. I don't have to have the meaning behind everything. I can just rock out and play music. Sometimes we can get in our heads, we can overthink things. Some of us were meant to figure out all the philosophy of it, and some of us were here to just rock out. It's kind of an irony because here I am making a podcast and newsletter and everything about the meaning of music, but the real gist of it is we have sound. Earth is full of amazing sounds. Humans make sounds, and they can be self-evident. They can be the things that they are. But I was watching a concert, and I was really inspired, and I was thinking, you know, rocking out, that can be all it is. You can just rock out. So that's what I'll leave you with. You might just want to take it easy, play some music this week, not think about what it all means. Okay, that's episode 3. This was Earth Tones with your host, me, Jake Pardee. Hope you have a fantastic week. We will see you next time. And of course, I'm always here to remind you that we are a beautifully musical people on a fantastically musical planet. And let's enjoy some nice sounds this week. I'll see you again next time.